Hey guys, Lewis here, and in this video I want to talk about how to use Anki for language learning. Just to be clear, I'm not going to touch on the super basic things like how to install Anki and what flashcards are. I'm going to talk about mainly two things. The two things that I personally think people are really missing out on. You're wasting a bunch of time if you're not considering these two issues. The first issue is the algorithm, the FSRS. There is a new algorithm, a new scheduling algorithm that Anki has put in place that most people are not using. And you're wasting a bunch of time. You're really missing out if you're not using this new algorithm. I'll talk about it, why it's more effective, and how you can actually start to put it in place and start using it as opposed to the old algorithm SM2. The second thing I want to talk about is using, should you create your own flashcards or should you use pre-made decks that you download off of the internet? So I'm really going to talk about this because there's a huge potential for you to actually gain a bunch of time and actually be able to learn whatever language you're learning faster. So just a little bit of very short introduction for people who don't know me. Maybe you're new to this channel. My name is Lewis, and I started using Anki in 2016 to start learning Japanese. And as a matter of fact, I went for many years without knowing how to properly use flashcards and how to properly use Anki. I wasted a bunch of time. I burnt out multiple times. I gave up on Anki multiple times, and finally I managed to actually get a good grasp, and through a lot of trial and error certainly, and a lot of research. In spite of being a native French speaker, I managed to learn multiple languages, in part thanks to Anki. I learned English, I learned Japanese, I learned Italian, and so Anki has been a huge part in me succeeding in language learning. As a software developer, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is I'm a software developer and I have been able to use Anki to actually develop custom, pre-made decks for multiple languages. They're called the Anki core decks. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this, but I'll put a link in the description. But I have created pre-made decks with the 10,000 most common words for a lot of languages, very complete decks. I'll put the link in the description, but this is not the purpose of this video. So I've also talked to a lot of people in the field of SLA, so second language acquisition. I'm thinking specifically of Professor Paul Nation, who is huge on flashcards. He essentially said that flashcards is the most effective way to learn languages. All right, so first I want to talk about the first issue, which is the FSRS, and then I'll talk about the second issue, which is should you make your own cards or use pre-made decks? So the FSRS stands for the Free Spaced Repetition Scheduler. It's an algorithm, it's a scheduling algorithm baked inside of Anki, but most of you guys are not using the FSRS. And so it's fine, you're still learning a lot of stuff, and as a matter of fact, I went multiple years without using the FSRS because it was not available. But the FSRS is really going to help you cut down your review time by at least 20 to 30%. And if you've been using Anki for a while, that doing your reviews is the most time consuming stuff, and this is the number one factor. Doing too many reviews is the number one factor for people burning out with Anki, which is a real shame because Anki is a super effective and super efficient way to learn languages. So people right now are using SM2. So this is the original, Anki algorithm, scheduling algorithm. It decides on, depending on the button that you press on the flashcard, again, hard, good, or easy, it's going to decide, okay, where do I schedule this flashcard? The FSRS is another algorithm. It's based on machine learning, and it's an upgrade over the SM2 algorithm. So You may have watched other videos on how to use Anki and how to tweak the settings to optimize for retention and better learning, but now it's not necessary anymore. These videos are pretty much, they're not valid anymore, because it used to be the case that with the SM2 algorithm, there were a lot of settings that you had to really tweak and change if you wanted to optimize for retention, but this is not the case anymore. With the FSRS, Anki is going to automatically adapt to your own profile and to your own flashcards, and so each flashcard is going to be optimized in terms of its settings automatically. The only thing that you need to tweak is what is called the retention level, and I'll talk about what this is exactly in a second. The algorithm is going to do most of the stuff for you. You don't need to worry too much about tweaking the settings. And the result of this is going to be about 20 to 30% trimmed down on time for the same retention level. This is a huge gain of time. This potentially means hundreds, if not thousands of hours over multiple years, because you're supposed to use Anki for multiple years to really remember things in the long term. I just want to mention something here. I'm going to show you how to enable the FSRS algorithm, but it may take a few weeks to actually kick in and start to actually work. And the reason for this is it's a machine learning algorithm. It needs some data on your flashcards, on how you behave with the flashcards, in order to actually start being able to optimize things. All you need to know is that the FSRS is based on many studies. There are many studies showing the superiority of the FSRS over SM2 and over other scheduling algorithms like SuperMemo and so on. So I want to talk a little bit about how the FSRS work for people who are not convinced, and then I'll show you how to enable it, because it's pretty easy. The way the FSRS works, it's pretty complex. There's a lot of machine learning involved, but the main concept that you need to remember is the memory state. So the memory state is actually made up of multiple components. There are 3 components. The first component is retrievability, which is R, so retrievability. Retrievability is a concept that says it's a measure that predicts how likely you are to get a specific flashcard right. So you can set this number in Anki, your desired retrievability for your flashcards. So it can be 10%, very bad, right? It can be 90%. In all the flashcards that you learn, the likelihood that you're going to get a flashcard right when you do the reviews is going to be 90% if you choose this number. Now you may ask, well, why don't I choose 100%? I remember everything. Well, yeah, in theory this may sound good, but in order for you to really get 100% of your flashcards right, you're going to need to review things much more frequently, which may not be a desirable thing. You're going to spend a whole lot more time than, as opposed to, say, for example, you say, okay, I want 90% retrievability. You're going to have a lot less reviews to do, a lot less time that you're going to need to spend on your reviews, and you're still getting 90%. So it's just a 10% difference. So we'll talk about this a little bit later when I show you how to set retrievability in Anki. All right, now the next measure we talked about, so the memory state is made up of retrievability, and then we have stability, S. So this is the time in days taken for retrievability to drop from 100% to 90%. And next we have difficulty, so this is D. Essentially, this is a measure of how difficult is it to increase the stability of a particular flashcard. Enabling the FSRS in Anki is pretty easy. You're just going to go to your deck options, and then if you have the latest versions of Anki, and if you don't have these options enabled, I encourage you to actually update your Anki, because the older versions of Anki do not have these options. then you need to just enable the FSRS here and set your desired retrievability level. Now, as far as, what is the optimal retrievability level for an Anki deck? Well, I would encourage you to actually set this not to 100%. This is not good. 100%, it's not possible. But even 95% is too much. You're going to get a lot of reviews. I would say that a good retrievability level would be anywhere from 85 to 90. This is sort of a sweet spot where you're not going to get tons of reviews, but you're going to get a fair amount of reviews, and this is going to enable you to really remember most of what you learn. All right, so now lastly, I want to talk about very quickly on which buttons you should use with the FSRS. So when you're using Anki, you're doing your reviews, you have 4 buttons that are presented to you. So you have the again button, the hard button, the good button, and the easy button. You may be wondering, well, which buttons should I use? And here I'm going to give you some very simple guidelines on which buttons you should use. But so the again button is a button that you should use when you don't know the card. It's a fail, okay, pretty easy. The hard button, the second button, is a button that you shouldn't be using too much. It should be pretty rare. It's when you got a card slightly wrong, or it took you a long time to get a card right. I would encourage you to use the again button much more often than the hard button, because the hard button still has a notion of, the card, but it was a little bit difficult. Whereas again is saying, well, you don't know the card. So I think it's a lot more reasonable in a lot of cases to say, okay, I don't know this card well enough for me to consider it even hard. So let's do it again. Now, the third button, the good button, is the button that you should be using most of the time. And if you set your retrievability to 90%, this is the button that you should click on 90% of the time. This is just saying, okay, I know this flashcard, so reschedule it in the future. And finally, the fourth button, the easy button, this is somewhat of a dangerous button, because when you press the easy button, you're saying, well, I know this card so well that I want it to be scheduled pretty far into the future. It's not just that, but it's going to be scheduled in the future, and even for future reviews, Anki is going to remember that, well, this was easy. So even in the future, when you review it again, I'm going to schedule it very, very far. So this is a pretty dangerous button. Make sure that when you're pressing this button, you really know the card well, and you're not going to need so many reviews of this flashcard in the future. All right, now let me talk about the second topic of this video, the second biggest issue with Anki, which is, should you create your own cards, your own custom cards, or should you use pre-made decks with, you have thousands of already made flashcards already made for you, and you can start studying right away. So, there are very strong opinions on both sides of the aisle. People saying, notably, people doing AJAT, or, whatever you call it these days, MIA, they're saying, well, custom flashcards are a lot better, because when you make your own flashcards, not only can you select specifically the vocabulary and the sentences that you want to learn that are relevant to your case, but it is also the case that just by virtue of making the flashcards and having to think, okay, how do I make this, and what does this mean, and how do I write it down, just by virtue of doing this, your retention is going to go up. So the learning does not necessarily just take place when doing the learning and doing the review. It takes place when you make the flashcard. And this is true. I have experience with custom flashcards, making my own, plus pre-made decks as well. Now, people who are more into pre-made decks, which I feel like they're a little bit more silent on the internet, they don't talk about it as much, they're not as vocal. They're saying, well, making custom flashcards is all right, but it's way too time consuming. I would rather have a pre-made deck with a bunch of flashcards that I can study. Here's my take. You should do both. You should get a pre-made deck as a base for your studying, and then you can make your custom flashcards. Let me explain. So you have the pre-made deck, and you can add flashcards to the pre-made deck if you want, or you can customize the pre-made deck's flashcards to your liking. Now, the thing with custom flashcards is, number one, it's super time consuming. It's extremely time consuming. You know, when I was making my custom flashcards, and I still do sometimes, there were cards where, you know, the target word or the target sentence, these were very, very common words that you could find in any well pre-made deck, all right? So you're wasting a lot of time because there are decks already out there that have all of these words and flashcards. Now, second reason is when you're learning a language, and I'm thinking of Japanese here, but this applies to really a lot of languages. One of the most important principles is the principle of frequency. When I talked with Professor Paul Nation, who is an expert, like literally he wrote the book on vocabulary learning and language acquisition. I asked him, like, if you had a year to learn a language, what would you do? The very first words that came out of his mouth were, I would use a frequency list as a rough guide for my studying. Meaning that when you're doing your custom flashcards and, you know, you're mining words or sentences from, you know, TV shows, anime, newspapers and stuff, that's great. But keep in mind that you need to learn the most frequent words first. Or let me rephrase this. You don't need to do this, but the return on your time is going to be so much higher if you focus on the most frequent items first. It's a no-brainer. You need to get a pre-made deck with the most common stuff first, and then, you know, it's essentially a list of flashcards that is sorted by frequency. And so most pre-made decks have this, although, you know, it's not, you really have to check with the pre-made deck. I know that with my decks, the Anki core decks, I'll put the link in the description. This is what I did. I wrote a computer program, an algorithm that went through 1 million sentences in multiple languages and classified each word. It took the stem of the word, the basic, the root of the word, and it said, okay, this appeared, you know, 1,600,000 times in the 1 million sentences. So this is the, 16th most common word. The flashcards in my pre-made decks and in a lot of other pre-made decks are ordered by frequency. And this is how you make quick progress. All right. So not only that, but when you're making your custom flashcards, if you really want to make good flashcards with, like audio and examples and stuff like that, it's very, very time consuming. And are you 100% sure that the custom flashcards that you're making are accurate? Probably not. The way I made the Anki core decks and the way that a lot of pre-made decks are made is that I took the 10,000 most common words in the languages, and there are a bunch of, you know, decks that I made for multiple languages: French, Spanish, Italian, German. Some of them are still, in the oven, in the making. But I took these languages, I took the 10,000 most common words, and it's a pretty hard task because I had to write a computer program to go over 1 million sentences and extract the 10,000 most common words. And for each word, each flashcard has so much information. It would be really, really hard to actually replicate this on your own. There is the word that you need to learn in the target language. So for example, a French word. And then you have the translation in English. You have an example sentence at the right level. So the first word has an easy sentence, and the 10,000, the last flashcard has a harder sentence. You have the translation for the sentence. You have the audio for the word. You have the audio for the sentence with native-like pronunciation. You have a mnemonic using the keyword part, the keyword technique. this is something that is proven to actually improve retention. There is a word part analysis, again, proven to improve retention. So there's so much information. It would be really hard to actually replicate this just using custom flashcards. I know it sounds like I'm promoting my decks, and I'm promoting my decks a little bit here, but what I'm saying is that there is some value in creating your custom flashcards, but well-made, pre-made decks for Anki are hugely valuable, and it would be insane to think that you can even, just replicate these decks, by just creating your own flashcards in a reasonable amount of time. So the conclusion of the second point here about pre-made decks is get a pre-made deck, a well-made pre-made deck, because you only need one. You only need one with 10,000 words, let's say, to become fluent. Get this as a base. If you find flashcards that you don't like or flashcards that are missing, then create your own cards in this deck or modify the flashcards in the deck. So just get it as a base and then customize it as you go. You're not going to waste any time by doing this. And if you get a good, well pre-made deck, it's just a no-brainer. So I'll put a link in the description if you're interested, ankicoredex.com. You don't need to buy anything from me. There are plenty of different, pre-made decks on the internet. So do whatever you want. I'm happy either way. So, all right. So see you in the next video.